see, you can see it set up for, among other things, a tea ceremony, but it's also like a little meditation house. And a monk can come here to like retreat from the Sangha to meditate. And they could come here for a day, 2 days, 3 days, a week. And what they're doing is it's when you're doing some heavy work and some real intense work. And it usually is dealing with something that's like very powerful, like powerful habit energy in you that you're trying to get a handle on. And so within the Buddhist tradition, they have these little, it's called a hermitage. It's like a little place where you go to be by yourself. They have these hermitages, but the point of Buddhism is never to stay in a hermitage, because you can make yourself quote-unquote perfect all alone, but as soon as you get with people, then you're a jerk again, right? So the idea is you always return to the Sangha, you return to the community. So you work on something very intensely that you've been struggling with. And then you return to the Sangha, you bring your energy back with you, your energy of insight, your energy of illumination, which you share with the Sangha, because even the insights that you have will not be as deep as what the Sangha might see. So this is why they say to look at something with Sangha eyes means if you have a real problem that's really intense, you really think about it deeply, then you share it with members of your Sangha, and then they listen mindfully, really think about it, give a meditative response back. And the idea is you'll have far deeper insights, because rather than seeing it from your perspective, you're seeing it from every angle. And so this tradition is so you can look at something more deeply yourself. But it's never that that's the final answer. You always return to the Sangha. You return to your community. And I mentioned before, you'll see there's like a little tea table there. And it's also for, they have incense there as well. But the idea is that tea within the Buddhist tradition is part of a meditative act as well. And the pouring of tea is a meditative event, and the receiving the tea, and then drinking the tea, experiencing it. And by the way, tea is regarded, the tea ceremony is regarded as probably the single most intimate thing that two human beings can do. So from the Buddhist tradition, it's like, in American culture, it's sex. Right? You know, it's like, what's really intimate? And then we even have a word for it. What's really intimate? Fucking. You know, it's so intimate, even sounds intimate, doesn't it? You know, but for them, it's this ritual tea ceremony, and it's very intimate sharing, and during the entire tea ceremony. And a tea ceremony can literally take like 2 to 3 hours. During the entire tea ceremony, not a word is spoken. And that's that whole idea of this, when they talk about noble silence, they really mean it in the sense that there's something deep and rich that occurs between people in silence. They believe that insights occur always within moments of silence, and so deep connection happens, because literally, when you think about connection, when you really connect to someone, it's when all of a sudden you have an insight. I didn't know you, then all of a sudden, I know you. You know, I know you. All of a sudden there's that feeling that you have, right? If anyone's been in an intimate relationship where all of a sudden it's like somebody reveals something very profound about them that helps you see them more deeply, and you feel deeply connected after that. And so the tea ceremony is one of those institutional modes of connecting very, very deeply. And so effectively, it's what you call Sangha building. So the idea is we always think of Sangha as like a group of, 50 monks and nuns that get together and they bring a community together. But Sangha, from the Buddhist standpoint, when you're dating, you should be forming a Sangha and understand it to be that. In which case, then, the 5 precepts, because the precepts were developed by the Buddha specifically for Sangha. That's where they haven't mentioned that here, but it was created specifically for the formation of Sangha. So when you build your community, deep listening, right? Loving speech, the basically healthy sexual connection in contrast to user sexual connection, right? So when you really take a look at right consumption, if from their perspective, if you're watching really violent programming or listening to programming that really degrades the opposite sex or turns relationship into nothing about sex, from the Buddhist standpoint, you're harming your relationship. That's what you're doing, and you should be honest about it. So as soon as you start doing that, they think, well, what you're doing is you're taking the priority of the relationship off the plate. So from the Buddhist standpoint, things like silently spending time together. Imagine with your boyfriend or girlfriend spending an hour or 2 hours together where you're not talking and not fucking. Because for the Buddhists, talking, just like fucking, can be the way you actually create separation, right? You don't want to deal with what's really going on in the relationship, so you just fuck, right? And it sort of makes the problem go away for right now. But real intimacy is facing the problem together. That's real intimacy, because real intimacy, from the Buddhist standpoint, is authenticity. It's saying what is true, right? And so when we're having sex and we feel disconnected, like I'm sure everyone here has had that disconnected sex. You guys aren't getting along, the relationship's on its way out, and you have the sex anyway. And in the Buddhist standpoint, what that is that's dishonest, and it's the most profound kind of dishonesty. It is the dishonesty with our body. So we're literally putting dishonesty into action is what we're doing. And that's why, by the way, the Buddhists say, great to have sex, but you should have it in the context of love. Because they believe if you're having sex just anonymous, ooh, you're pretty, let's grind up against each other. What it's doing is it's a form of dishonesty, because your body is saying, I feel intimate with you, but in fact you're not. And so there's this fundamental disconnect. So that's why, by the way, the Buddhist monks believe that there can be celibacy, because we think of celibacy as a kind of suffocation because you live without intimate contact. And from the Buddhist monk's standpoint, 90% of the sex that you have isn't about intimate contact, right? So they're not giving up much in that sense, because the true intimacy happens in the silent spaces, in the deeply true spaces. And that's why we don't like to look at each other when we're in silence. If you've noticed, like, especially at first when we're eating meals together, you'll look at somebody but you'll look away, and it's because it's way too intimate for it. It feels like it's like you're almost getting naked with this person. Very well. And for a whole lot of people, it's easier to get naked with someone than actually just sit and be quiet and spend time with them. So from this Buddhist practice, the Buddhist practice would say, no, practice that. In fact, they would tell you, before you have sex, you should have that kind of practice. The practice in silence and connection. And connect with the person, connect with them for an hour before you have sex. And they'd say, and then experience intimacy. They'd say, then that could be intimacy. That's what it could be. So a lot of people think that the monks don't practice. They don't have sex because, like in the West, there's this idea that sex is defiling. Buddhists, there's no associate. That doesn't exist in the East. So that, by the way, that's crazy talk in the Far East. So that doesn't make any sense. The reason they don't is purely for energy conservation. Sex expends energy, and the Buddhist monks have actually taken a vow that they will direct all their energies towards achieving enlightenment. And you might go, that's so selfish. Well, it's enlightenment for them, but remember, they don't see themselves as separate from us. So by becoming themselves enlightened, they draw us closer into the circle of enlightenment. So their dedication is to that. And if you think of enlightenment as sort of like pole vaulting and having to get over a rail, the idea is if they expend their energy it makes it less likely they'll be able to flip over the rail. So they're storing every kind of energy they have, which means breath energy. That's why the noble silences. They're storing all their energy for the practice, so they don't frivolously expend it all the time. That's why they're not having anonymous sex with the nuns. You know. So imagine you put men and women together, It's like, but their dedication is actually to achieve this alignment. And they'll tell you, most people, like, I can't remember, but the student who said that, it would drive a person crazy. Right in front of a whole bunch of non-sexually active monks and nuns. But for I think his point was really important, and that is, we really imagine that kind of physical isolation as being suffocating. And what the Buddhists would say is, no, it's spiritual isolation that's suffocating, and you think you can spiritually connect with your penis or vagina, right? And they're saying, no, that isn't what you need to connect. And so they would say, we have a better chance of achieving the connection so that we don't starve. Our chances are much better than yours out in traditional American culture that teaches you that nothing connects, right? It's like our culture, we build a community called a family. We have children, and then we leave. Why? Because we're unhappy. That's always the reason people leave, because they're unhappy. And the Buddhists would say, well, leaving your Sangha can't be the path to happiness. Building your Sangha will bring you your happiness. So in other words, we have a fractured relationship. My solution to a fractured relationship is to fracture it more. The Buddhist response to a fractured relationship is to heal it by reconnecting again. So from the Buddhist standpoint, our culture teaches us everything pretty much the wrong way. And so that's why they say this culture of all cultures desperately needs Sangha, because your culture is so diluted. It actually teaches the opposite of what you need. And so as a result, they go, look, people go from drinking a little to drinking a lot. Do you notice that? They go, there's a reason. Your culture gives you drinking as the solution. And when you drink and it doesn't do it for you, guess what you do? Yeah, you drink more. You're thinking, maybe just more. People do that with alcohol. People do that with money. People do that with sex. People do that with relationships. And Buddhism says the reason is because all those answers are exterior to yourself. And the answer actually lies within. The Buddha within. So it lies within the Buddha, with the Dharma, the teachings, and then the Sangha, the community that you build. So when a lot of people say, well, the Buddha is very into isolation or, doesn't love, it's like just the opposite. The Buddha actually teaches that you need Sangha. It's our culture that teaches us you don't. Buddhism actually teaches, the Buddha himself taught, no, you need community. And in fact, our reactions are all inverted. When I feel separation from you, I push you further away. Instead of when I feel separation from you, I step up, right? If you're really injured, so you're mean, I hurt you. It's the opposite response. We have a culture of opposite responses. So a lot of people, it's like they talk about being rebellious and counterculture, and they have like the tattoos and drug use to prove it. And the monks would say, no, we're the real counterculture. Because your culture says, have sex all the time. Our culture doesn't. Your culture says money's all that matters. Our culture doesn't. So they're saying we're the real counterculture. And it's a counterculture, actually, that argues for outlandish things like happiness, peace, human connection, right? Very unintuitive things for us. So in any case, but this is what it's used for. So the idea is, by the way, clearly Buddhists believe there are times when sometimes you need space, even from loved ones, right? Because Sangha is a loving community. There's times you need space. And they literally create it rather than fight it. So in other words, have you ever had someone communicate they need a little space and it makes you want to draw them closer? Within the Buddhist practice, they recognize sometimes you do need space. And in fact, they provide you with the space for you to go and have it. With the belief being that you'll always return to the community stronger with deeper insights as a result of it. So it's very different than our own